Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Learning DITA Live. This is our final session of day one, and it's Branding 101, Developing Brand Identity in DITA, presented by Stan Doherty. Sorry, Stan.
It's okay.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. All right, so Learning DITA Live is brought to you by Scriptorium, the content strategy experts. Since 1997, Scriptorium has helped companies manage, structure, organize, and distribute content in an efficient way. If you're trying to figure out how the DITA model can best support your content, or if you're setting up a DITA system, please contact us. We'd love to work with you. LearningDITA.com and Learning DITA Live would not be possible without the help from our sponsors. A few housekeeping notes here. All attendees are muted during the webcast. And if you could, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the GoToWebinar interface if you're not familiar with it already. You can type your questions in at any time in the questions module, but our speaker will answer the questions at the end of the session. And at the beginning of the question and answer session, look for a link to an evaluation survey. We'd love to hear your feedback on this session. And that is enough from me, so I will go ahead and turn it over to Stan. There you go, Stan. It should be all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Caitlin. Hi there, Stan Doherty. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good wherever you are. Presentation today, chat today is really about branding. There's a lot there. I had thought that there would be lots of literature on this particular topic, given the fact that DITA has been out there over 15 years at this point, but there really isn't. So this is both a presentation to kind of open the door on how to get into the branding thing with DITA, but it's also an invitation. So please, if you've done work in here, if you've got other solutions that work in DITA with branding, please, this is an invitation to get in touch both with me or anybody else in the DITA community and share your experiences. So without further ado, off we go. So today I'm gonna, my presentation basically I start off usually with the key takeaways, just in case everyone has to run away for some reason. So what are the big takeaways? Second is how do you buffer your production content from all the requests that we get for branding? Changes in identity, changes in program, changes in visuals, whatever. How do you buffer your production content so you're not in a constant state of churn? Third is just some process recommendations. How do you approach dealing with all of the requests that come in and the changes that you discover at the same time? So how do you do that? Fourth is the geek section. We're going to take a look at very specific resources and tips and techniques and structures inside DITA that are very, very well tuned for branding. So then we'll do Q&A at the end. So,
hey, Stan, just one moment. I think you're sharing the presenter's view and not the slides. Can you go ahead and switch which screen you're showing?
Okay. Well, let's see if we can figure that out.
Let's see. I think if you run your presentation and just in GoToWebinar, just quickly, you can select which screen you're showing.
How's that?
And let's see. That's looking good.
I'm seeing full screen on my end. Does that help?
Well, we're seeing PowerPoint here. If you resume the slideshow, we'll be able to tell.
I did. So my slide right now is showing agenda as the slide, full screen.
Yes, it's not full screen here, though. We see PowerPoint.
Okay. What would you like me to do?
Let's see. I think there's resume slideshow up in the corner there.
Which corner?
and it just disappeared on me. Let's see. We will try to follow along here, but this is looking better.
All right. So should I proceed or?
Yes, go ahead.
All righty. Well, sorry, folks, and PowerPoint branding is an issue clearly. All right. So I'm going to just slide through it, but Bill, please jump in if you think there's something I should be doing differently. I want to make sure people can see everything I've got here.
Sure.
All right, making that a little bit bigger. All righty, who is this guy? I'm involved with Oasis, which develops and maintains DITA, on the technical committee, which is responsible for the specs, and I'm also on the adoption technical committee, which is responsible for trying to identify things that are obstacle to adoption or maintenance. So please, the invitation here is if you've got something that you need to share or want to share, or you want to get involved with Oasis, formally or informally, please get in touch. I'm also working at Oracle Corporation. I'm a consulting content developer, which is a fancy title for a writer, I guess. And I'm working in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Group. I and Bob Johnson are also working basically in the DITA area in Boston with the new user group, Boston DITA. We've rebooted that, and I'm co-administrator there. So if you're in the New England area, please get in touch. And lastly, I have an academic background, so I'm involved with ACM and SIGDoc and reaching out to academic programs and helping them out, both with structured writing and also to help their programs get bootstrapped in terms of getting some exposure to the real world. Here's some contact information. So depending what kind of interests you have, there's several addresses. Yes,
Hey,
Bill.
Stan, yeah, just a moment. Your screen is currently showing black. I hate to bring that up. You could probably revert to however you were showing it first. We were just seeing, let's see. We're currently waiting to view. And now we're seeing PowerPoint, the full interface. So we're hoping it's going to go through. Otherwise, we can probably navigate this in this view here.
Is this okay? I have full screen on my end.
No, we don't see full screen. We're seeing the actual PowerPoint itself. PowerPoint application. But it's at least showing the slide before we were seeing black.
Okay, well that's an improvement. Just jump right in, Bill. If anytime it loses its mind.
No problem. We want to make sure that people are seeing what you're presenting.
All righty. Off we go. So the speaker affiliations, but please get in touch, and depending which your level of interest and point of interest, here are all the email addresses to get in touch. Quick disclaimer from Oracle. This just says that if you believe anything I have to say, please don't put it in a contract. So it goes with that. Key takeaways. So 4 key takeaways. One, create a buffer between your production content and all the inbound requests that you get to update any branding that you have, and we'll see much more of this, but create a buffer. Don't let 52 requests just kind of land as individual things on your lap, because you'll just go crazy. Second, budget how much time you and your team have for these branding issues. I recommend a very, very high percentage of the time being on testing. What does this proposed change mean? What is it going to do by impacting the content? What's it going to do to our individual writers? What's it going to do to localization? So do 80% testing, and 20% of the implementation will fall out. So if you've done a decent job on testing, the implementation just kind of happens. See, so that's just a little bit of a best practice for budgeting your time. Assume that other organizations and departments in your company have different assumptions, tools, and expectations about what branding means. And you're going to have to navigate around those, and you're going to have to manage expectations, because there really aren't a set of very, very consistent global definitions on a lot of this stuff. And lastly, whatever you're doing in branding, make it visible to management. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and this is not magic, right? It's just another change to our content, another change to our design. So please make it visible. And let them know that it's costing. Every time they do, any big change like this, or even a bunch of small changes, it impacts your productivity. So make that visible. See. So major theme is buffer your production content. So every organization has different departments, stakeholders I call them, marketing, user experience, legal, that all have some skin in the game. They design things, they want to push out programs, they want to redefine the identity of a product, and this is all goodness. You know, it's all, I think, part of being a company that is focused on its customers and providing value. That said, it can be a little fuzzy though. You know, where does corporate branding begin and end? Where is personalization, especially around programs, begin and end? What is the user experience design as it impacts the documentation design? How about customer journeys? Big deal there. I mean, I work for a company that's trying to figure out how, it does figure out how do we make customer journeys move from on-premise up to the cloud, right? So how does the documentation play into that, and how do the different brands of different roles and different paths through that journey, how are they manifest in the documentation? And if you've ever been involved with an acquisition one way or another, you're very much into the rebranding side of it. So it's a little fuzzy, and everybody has some degree a different goal. This little cartoon looks at how do you rebrand wolves as sheep, and yes, that's definitely a different goal. But everyone I've found, in most companies I work for, has been very sincere. You know, how do we make this branding work for our customers? How do we really basically enhance the value of the product for them by being ever more clear about what the value is transmitted to them? See, so all of our stakeholders here by and large, they have the right spirit. They're looking at the right things as they go. Each one of them makes change requests. I've been managing documentation for 30 years or so, and I routinely get change requests for icons, keywords, legal terms, style sheets, metadata, all sorts of things, and it just comes directly from each one of these different groups basically to my desk, right? And as you see on this slide here on the right hand side, if my production sources, the whole DITA stack, as I like to call it, the maps and the topics and the keyword libraries and the icons and graphics and all the metadata and all that stuff, if that's being to some degree pummeled by all of these change requests all the time, you're in kind of a state of constant disruption. You know, it's just impact, right? And it's putting us, if that's the way the world runs, then it's putting us in a position that we're being kind of passive at this point. It's hitting us. We're not, in a sense, being able to evaluate it really very well. And basically it's running us, we're not running it. And it's not only just one team doing things at one time a year, it actually is much worse than that. You get quarterly changes from different groups, or these requests from different groups. The nature of the request and the timing of the request from quarter to quarter to quarter differs greatly. So you may have one quarter, like in Q3, where all sorts of stuff is landing on your desk all at once, and the next quarter maybe only a couple of things. So this is really setting us up for a lot of churn, right? And I want to make the case that probably the biggest takeaway from the presentation is there's things you can do in DITA that would allow you to take more control or have more of a say in understanding what these requests are all about. So if marketing or legal or management makes a request of you and they say, oh, hey, we want you to do this, or we've got a new program that wants to do this, or we redefined our website and we think we want to have the documentation reflect that, those are all great and valid requests. But for protecting your content and for you to make sense of it, both for you and for your team, and especially for your customers, there needs to be some way to evaluate it, organize it, and allow you to basically put together a change plan. So how do you kind of like look at all of these things, test them, prioritize them, vet them out, and then measure how you're going to implement them, see? And that's what I mean about this buffer your production content stuff. We're gonna go into much more detail on this, but the notion is basically to create a subset of your production sources in a separate repo, in a separate repository, or a separate branch of your CCMS, and have in it enough of the representative kind of elements of your production system so that when a change request comes in for something, you're able to test it against non-production branch of your content or a non-production repo. So you get all the information about how well the change has been thought through. Is it really well cooked? Is it something that has a big impact or almost no impact? You're basically creating a separate branding repo that has test sources in it that you can use as a sandbox. See, and that's one of the takeaways, I think, in terms of protecting your content. A few things about process and what falls out of that. Manage your process, and your budget for branding is communicate to your stakeholders that you've created this buffer, right? So don't make it a secret. Tell them, hey, you know, we're getting all sorts of requests from different places, and we really want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by everyone involved. So tell them that you've created this buffer, this special repo, and why you've done it. They are your stakeholders, so let them know what you're up to. And strange as it may sound, they really actually kind of like it after a while, because you're doing some work for them, and they're able to see things in the documentation that sometimes they can't see in their own disciplines. I'm a fan of Agile, Scrum in particular. Be agile. As these requests come in, create the appropriate epics and stories and tasks in your backlog. Capture who the requester is for some branding issue, whatever it is. Summarize the request, you know, and validate that your summary of it is something the stakeholder agrees with, which is often very good. Capture any attachments, anything they send you, links, any CSSs, icons, objects, renaming tables, spreadsheets, anything. Just capture it in the ticket. So you're creating kind of a history and a background for it. And especially take a look at, especially if you're in a Scrum kind of environment, take a look at what we call the definition of ready, which means that this request is something that is sufficiently mature, it's sufficiently detailed that your team or you are able to work on it, right? And if it's not, you keep it in the backlog. So if someone says, hey, I'd like to make a change a couple months from now, and I'll let you know within a couple of weeks at the end, that's not ready to work on. See, so you know, be tough there. See, so create these epic stories and tasks as the requests come in, put them in your backlog, and that will be one of the biggest steps towards managing it. Simply tagging and bagging it. Identify across these various requests areas of commonality and divergence. So if you've got, for example, user experience and marketing working together on a new program, that's great. You've got some commonality. If in fact you've got field sales marketing and corporate marketing working on two different programs and there's some contradictory requests or contradictory aspects of the request, identify the divergence as well. And use the stories that you created, in this case in number 2, to be a place where you can have a little bit of that dialogue back and forth with groups that may not be talking to one another. Many of them do, but you shouldn't assume that they do, right? So use your test repo as an incubator to identify the areas where you need to apply some additional effort to clarify things. For every request, this is kind of interesting if you've got a test repo. Every request that comes in, consider creating a branch, right, in your repo, especially if you're in Git or SVN or something. Test the proposed changes, whatever they are, to your terminology, your artwork, or your metadata. And generate from that particular request-specific branch some sample output. You know, go back to the stakeholders and say, hey, you asked us to do this kind of thing in order to make our web documentation look more like our web CMS generated, you know, home pages. Is this what you wanted, right? Validate on a branch, not in production, but on a branch, the things that you believe that the requesters want you to work on. I can't tell you the number of times that once I showed people, again, is this what you wanted? They told me no, right? And the most productive thing we then had was a dialogue about, well, what do we need to change? See, the last thing you want is to do a huge implementation on your production content, and then somebody says, oh, geez, I'm not sure this is what this wasn't what I was like looking for. See, this isn't it, right? And then finally, on this branch, extrapolate the cost of what the implementation would mean on your tooling, your writers, your localization content, and especially on the content itself. Only a few changes in product names can have a big ripple effect on running content. It's just, without having a test repo to walk through kind of the impact of it and test it on the branch, man, you're flying blind. So you really don't know what the impact is going to be. A couple more notes. Merge each test branch after you've tested it and you've got a little bit of buy-in that you're on the right track. Test how that branch and the changes you made go back into your main line. So how disruptive is it bringing those changes back into what you consider to be, at least in your test repo, your main design, your main set of terms, your main set of graphics, right? How does the merge work? And develop then finally the stories and the tasks to go off and to implement what you have in your test repo, your branding repo, back out into your production sources in your production repo or a branch of your CCMS. And lastly, as always, don't treat it as magic, don't treat it as free. Whatever tasks you've defined for implementation in your production sources, make sure you're balancing them very visibly with management against whatever your commitments are for content development. See, companies ask us to do branding changes, and that's all good for the customer, but again, it's not free. The more you can measure it, the more mature the entire organization becomes about the ultimate cost of doing this. And that cost is distributed across the entire organization. We'd be kind of foolish not to be identifying those costs as we go through. We really need to identify and then make them visible. Okay, so that's as far as we've got for looking at kind of the process and the big picture of sorts. I think what's really kind of nice about working in a DITA environment is that DITA, pretty good news, has a lot of technical support for figuring this out, right? How do I model in DITA some of the things that the legal folks are asking me, or things that the user experience people are asking me to change, or some whole new way of looking at our audiences? So new kind of branching on who are our persona, what are our administrators doing, what are our end users doing, kind of thing. DITA, wasn't necessarily out of the box designed to do that, but it was designed to be very sophisticated, and that sophistication is something that is going to save us in this particular case. So on the technical side, it's good news. If we can model something that is a branding issue, and believe me, we'll go through these, right? Then you have the opportunity in DITA to control it. And I don't mean control the destiny of it, but to measure it, to get a handle on it, to get a sense of what's going on, to test it especially. See, so the first half of the presentation I was just going through talks about kind of the process of you getting in the middle of the conversation between your stakeholders and your writing team and your content to try to figure this out. The technical stuff, which is what we're about to go into, is then how do you model these potential changes in branding so that they make sense first to you and you can actually get a sense of cost. Okay, so most of this is going to be about modeling. Okay, I'll just mention in passing that all of the code that I'm about to go through, all this geeky stuff, is all up on our GitHub repo. When I discovered that there wasn't a whole lot written necessarily about branding in DITA, my first impulse is to go off and create another repo in GitHub and start to populate it with the things that I find and the things that I research. So I offer to you, please go off and clone or download or do anything you want this particular GitHub repo. It has working examples of all of the samples we're about to go through for the next few minutes. So the invitation there is, hey, take a look at what I did and please go do something better, okay? Find some holes in it, find some ways to augment it, and come back and share what you've learned. Or if you're really interested in this topic, which would be very cool, right? Please get in touch with me and we can partner up and figure out how to work on some of this stuff together. Or go off and do your own GitHub repo or whatever it is on branding, and I'd be glad to help you. So anyway, I'm just sharing everything I have for code for you both from an educational point of view and by way of invitation to say, hey, let's go off and partner up as a community, and let's try to figure out how we can make this something that's useful for everybody. Okay. So everything's on our GitHub. You do not need to take screenshots as you go. It's all there. I promise. So I'm about to walk through all of the different kind of components of a branding implementation, right? And I'll walk through each component individually. What does the component do? What are its goals? And then show you some sample code about it. So you get to see how do we model this particular branding issue in DITA. And after we walk through those ad nauseum, then we'll put it all together and you'll see how you can then in DITA model the entire branding solution. So we're going to go bottom up. Each of the components, how do you model it in DITA? Look at the code, and then how do you put it together so you know that you're able to fire or test this particular set of changes against some sample content and get a sense of cost and impact. Okay, so bottom up, here we go. So probably at the most prevalent kind of change in branding are product names, things like legal product names, suite names, and actually links to resources. So when we define a customer journey, there's a particular web page that has that specified. There's a bunch of information on persona. You know, if you're a particular type of user, what are the resources for you? What's available to you? So we do text libraries, basically key libraries, key definition maps in DITA, in order to understand how we capture and organize, how we model this kind of information. So I'm going to show you 3 different types of key maps, which are all just regular DITA maps dedicated to defining keys. One's going to look at terminology, terms. One's going to look at links that you have to boilerplate topics. And one's going to look at links to the web. And the notion is we put these in a key map so that they're easy to manage and they're effective, meaning they have influence, they're usable inside DITA topics. Okay, so the first one is branding in terms. And many people I know use DITA keys and use key maps in order to manage terminology. And this is all goodness. If there were a 1 in branding 101, this is it. This is the most common and the most beneficial way to get greater control over the terminology coming you from legal and from product management and from management. See, so here's a sample of a real little baby key map. And as you see in the red terms, you've got a definition K_term company. That's the name of the key. And then the value of the key, right, in terms of text, is listed under link text. See, so this is a key that is now available to anyone in any topic in any map, right? And as you get new requests for product suites or product names, or even forbid it, changes that impact your publication titles, right? You now have a place to go to capture all of those, to put them in one place and to manage them. So that's why this is probably the most prevalent and the most important of all of the branding models that you can do in DITA. Okay. So the second one, as you see, is map keys branding with links. Every publication, whether it's online or in a PDF or something, has all this boilerplate content, licensing stuff, revenue recognition statements, copyrights and all that. Well, rather than trying to manage them as 5 or 6 separate things, create, again, a key definition map that links down to topics that you happen to have. So if you've got your copyright information in one topic, and you've got patents in another, and a revenue recognition statement in a third one, just put them all in one place, so that if in fact you get from legal, or you get from sales, or you get from management some change in the boilerplate topics, at least you're protected your content from having to relink it. See, so you use these keys when you do a cross-reference or you do a map reference, right? So the underlying topic, right now I just have placeholder there, but if there were underlying topics for your company, those could change, but the references to them would not need to change. See, so you're buffering your maps and you're buffering your cross-reference pieces and topics, by putting all of this boilerplate stuff from other groups in one map, in one key definition map. Okay. Lastly, every company has loads and loads, especially big companies, of websites that they want to have us in documentation point our customers to. See, and same deal. You create yet another DITA map that contains key definitions, but instead of having terms or instead of having pointers, links off to boilerplate topics, what you have are links off to web pages. See, so the URL, in this case I have all Oasis placeholder URLs, but if the URL changes as a result of some request, like from corporate marketing or some new way of doing we call kind of pretty or kind of nuanced URLs, if anything changes coming our way, we're able to drop it into one place, in this case, this particular DITA map, this key map, and then all of the references to in our maps or in our topics as cross-references all resolve automatically. See? So for 5 minutes, you can put in new terms, new links to boilerplate, and some new URLs to support a new marketing program. Hit a button and you'll immediately get a sense for what the impact would be on some sample files. See, so these are kind of the most, probably the most prevalent and easy to use of the branding models that we have in DITA, all text libraries. I also get a lot of images, right? New logos, we get new badges, we get new kind of running banners, we get right down to tiny little icons and social media icons. So we get lots of stuff coming from various groups in the company, and we want to find a home for those as well. See, so in addition to text libraries, we want to collect and organize the images that are coming our way that are part of different branding programs. So same deal, you create yet another key definition DITA map library, and instead of text and links and things, you have defined here, you have keys that are pointing off to individual graphics files. So I'm doing a lot of work on a sample DITA implementation on this. It's for the academics actually. So I invented a company, and around the company I invented an entire doc set. I'm about halfway through writing it up. So I had to do branding on this fictitious company, this fictitious products. So I had to create things like logos for the company and little network icons and all this kind of stuff. And so what I've done is I've dropped them into this one key definition DITA map so that wherever I am, right, I can point to it. And secondly, I can all see them. So they're all in one place. I mean, I think any of you that have done much parenting, I had twins right off the bat, so I can tell you a lot about that, knows that keeping the things that you are concerned about in one place for periods of time where you can kind of keep an eye on it has a very high virtue. See, so in this particular case, instead of having a folder sitting on somewhere on a server that has all of the new images and icons and banners and things that corporate design has sent, and having them sit there, this kind of thing, putting it into a DITA map, and as we'll see, having a sample gallery that falls out of it, is just a way to make it all visible. You can see it. And if there are issues there, I can guarantee you'll see them so much more quickly as a result of having them in one place than not. See, so that's a library for graphics. Okay, so what we've seen is we've seen some examples of how to model text, how to model images, and now the really scary stuff is how to model metadata, right? The companies and the businesses we're often in these days are far more sophisticated than 20 years ago. So now the customer experience and the web outreach and the social media efforts have all given us so much more information about what's happening with our customers, what their interests are, what their buying patterns are, what they expect from us, see. And for many, many organizations and companies, this gets captured in metadata. If you've worked in Adobe Experience Manager, or if you worked in your CCMS, that has a lot of this profiling capability, you know what I'm talking about. The ability to model different types of users, what they consider to be valuable, what I call persona, and how we can tailor and how we can brand particular types of content for them. And this is such an exciting area. I mean, I can't tell you how cool this is, and how, in some sense, how DITA is so ready for a lot of this. It's been ready for a long time. Now we're really starting to kick it in and get to use it a bit. So I'm going to walk through a couple of these metadata subject scheme maps to show you what it looks like, and then just a quick peek at then how you use these values, how you use this metadata to basically do some filtering. So you can filter in or you can filter out content that's appropriate for a particular audience and a particular situation. Okay, so first we're going to look at persona, which is looking at a subject scheme map, which is, if you're not familiar with it, a subject scheme map is different than a regular DITA content map in that its primary job is to model metadata. See, so let's take a look at it. So here's a subject scheme map that deals with persona for this fictitious product that I created, you know, Storm Suite. And if you look further down in the section here, we have something called a subject definition. And a subject is fancy metadata speak for something to talk about, a topic, right? So in this particular case, what I've done is I now have a metadata subject scheme map that contains a defined subject about our administrative users. So the hypothetical administrators of this hypothetical product. And so the different kinds of administrators would be someone who's new, you know, someone who is really functioning as an architect, someone who is really focused on storage, any aspect of storage, right? But as you know, any companies that are really into storage, you know, they don't stop there. They want to go down a little deeper. So underneath the general category of admin for storage, you can have very particular audiences for file systems or database or something that's more on the object store side of things. Any and all of these different dimensions of the subject, administrative user, are now in the system when you've modeled it, and you can now actually correlate content and other metadata to these different administrative types. This is much more prevalent for what you're going to start seeing from our other groups asking us to participate in new branding programs or new sales programs. They're going to hand us a taxonomy or a series of persona and say, hey, what can you do to personalize or model your content to wrap it around this new program, right? I'm involved with one on developers and what developers really need and what they want. And it's quite the thing. If you can model the different types of developers or the different types of administrators or the different types of end users for your product, you're going to be in a position in DITA to then start to filter content in and out, to be able to filter graphics and things in and out as well. See, so this whole notion of modeling metadata and wrapping it around various branding requirements and branding programs, I think is a growth area for us. So I'm kind of highlighting it here a bit. But you kind of need to go in there and play with this a bit. See, so I encourage you to do so. You won't waste your time, in other words. So we have one DITA map that's defined persona. We've got another one that's going to come up and take those values, right? What are the different types of storage administrators? And it's going to, we do control attribute values for them. So in this particular case, I took the taxonomy that we had, subject admin, in the previous map, and I've mapped it to the DITA attribute audience. And what that means is I'm using this subject scheme map to control what are the total number of valid values for that attribute. I'll repeat that. For the audience attribute, once this DITA map kicks in, what are the only values that will be allowed to put into that audience attribute, whether it's a paragraph or a topic or a section, whatever it is. And what you'll see when you run it is that in your DITA editor, in this case, we're looking at the attributes for P, just a paragraph. And instead of having the default DITA values, you know, kind of what you see in your DITA editor are just the values that were defined in that persona DITA map. See, I'll repeat that. So you are controlling across your content what it is that your stakeholders are asking you to define as your users. And I'm just using the example of audience, but you can clearly see that it could be releases, it could be products, it could be any type of filtering metadata attribute that you want. See, so you have the ability to define metadata hierarchies. What is it that you want to have, right? And second, you're able to control those values, in other words, to exclude non-compliant values in your content, say. So this is kind of your dual control, you know, knobs or whatever. Once you understand what somebody's asking for you, how our content can support a new program, we want to be able to model it, and we want to be able to make sure that it gets implemented correctly. See, so those are kind of the two of the levers you got to play with in terms of metadata. And please, I encourage you to go off and do this. This actually works. It's actually pretty cool. But it means that we can look somebody in the eye when they say, "Hey, have you implemented this new scheme or this new product line identity?" We can say, "Yeah, yeah." And not only do we implement it, but we enforced it. We made sure that all the attributes were aligned for whatever the product or the audience or whatever the particular attribute would be. Okay. And lastly, once you've got all of this metadata kicking around, DITA offers, you know, the DITA val technology, especially if you're in the open toolkit, to basically say, okay, I want to turn on and I want to turn off keywords, libraries, graphics, see also sections, and various, you know, scoped metadata keys, right? All driven off of this DITA val technology. And we're kind of redesigning a lot of the DITA val for DITA 2.0 down the road. But for now, it's still a very, very powerful device to be able to say, hey, I want to model what's the impact of using this set of values versus that set of values. See? And this is very easy to model. So you can sit there, you know, in other words, once you've set up these components and all this metadata, you can kind of sit there and play with it a bit and see what the impact is on your test content, say. And you've created the equivalent of what we have usually in our test engineering or in our QA organizations, the equivalent of a test harness, a test environment. So we set up the framework, we set up the libraries, and then we just fire these various things at it and see what the impact is. So that's what DITA val is, okay? So what we've gone through is text libraries, we've gone through images, and we've gone through metadata, and we've seen that it's by and large DITA maps that are containing and organizing a lot of this information. And so you say, okay, so what? Once you have those libraries, what I call those components in place, you can roll them all up and put them into root maps that capture all of this information and allow you to do the testing that I was just talking about. So if you go up to that the GitHub repo, you'll see there's a DITA map up there that is a root map. It's called Map Branding 101. And it has in it all of the links down to these various component libraries. So everything you have for terms and web resources and boilerplate topics and graphics and all that other good metadata stuff, it's all in this one root map, and all of the key values that we were looking at are now available to be used anywhere. So what do you want to do with them? Well, one thing I highly recommend is you create what we call a gallery, you know, a series of topics, you know, one or more topics that capture all of these key values and just make them visible, because most people can't see what's inside these DITA libraries, right? These key definition libraries. But if you instantiate them, if you create an instance or a reference to each one in a regular topic, then you can print it out once a week. You know, you can show people. I can go back to marketing and say, hey, is this the nomenclature that you want us to use, right? I can assign JIRA tickets to have them review it, right? I can ask third parties to get involved, like sales and support, and say, hey, here's what we're about to implement. Does this make sense? See? So you can create these gallery topics that just kind of corral these values. You can also obviously run it against test content, and create a branch and run it against some of your test branding repo content and see what it looks like. You can create galleries to have all the links up to the corporate web resources. Run a link checker against it, make sure it works. Show it to the support people. Is this the most current link? Have them review it. And lastly, you can take a look at all the graphics, right? Putting all the graphics in one place, right, is really, really useful, because some of them are the wrong size and the wrong color, and you need to go back to the designers and figure things out. But again, if these things are just sitting in a folder somewhere, they're not going to help you much. You really need to kind of turn them loose, as it were, put them on a page, have people look at them, review them, and then critique it. And all of this is happening, again, not on your production sources. All of this is happening inside your test repo, say, which means you can turn it right, left, center, up and down, and it's not going to actually break the bank, say. So I highly recommend creating, once you've got these libraries all squared away, I highly recommend creating a series of test or gallery files where you can see them all in one place, okay? The last area in style sheets, whether they're CSS web style sheets or they're open toolkit kind of style sheets, occasionally someone will come by and go, hey, we have a new CSS for our web pages. Could you please just plug this into the documentation and make the web documentation look more like our marketing web pages? Now, I know an MD, okay? And I found that over the years, being a nice guy and saying, hey, yeah, I'll take a look at it, just doesn't work, right? Fundamentally, CSS style sheets and other style guides need to get deconstructed into something that our tools people can use when they go off and they update DITA Open Toolkit style sheets or CCMS style sheets. So of the 5 things on this page, text libraries, images, and metadata are largely, I think, within our control. They're pretty addressable. Some of the style sheet stuff that comes our way, or the DITA Open Toolkit specs that come our way, are, as you see from the graphic, they're just potholes. They're big potholes. And it's not that you can't work with them, it's just, you just need to be aware that they need some special handling, right? You can't just model them in XML. They're going to need some engineering work, see. But I thought I'd mention it in passing. We get requests for style sheets and for specs for DITA OT style sheets, and they just need a different way to handle them from the other XML stuff, okay? So that's where we are. So we have the stack here. These are all the ways to model requests for branding or branding elements inside DITA or inside the DITA support structures with DITA Open Toolkit. And this is basically how you get into the business of using DITA to brand your stuff. I kind of go back near final slide to say, hey, here's where we are. If you can spend some time to create that intermediate test environment, your ability to influence, and I mean positively influence, the kinds of changes and the scope of changes and the frequency of changes that impact your production sources, boy, you just can't overestimate that. You have the opportunity to use DITA as a test environment to get you that costing information and for you to provide feedback back to your stakeholders. Believe me, they value it. At first they're annoyed, but then they really value it, because first they see that you care, and second, you give them feedback that sometimes they don't have on their own. Some designers are kind of in a little bit of a vacuum, They design things, they work on these little boutique-y web pages, but don't have a sense of how that scales across thousands or hundreds of thousands of topics or pages. See, so giving them, never mind languages, so giving them feedback of, hey, here's what we saw, was this what you wanted? And let's partner up if we're going to do something a little bit differently. I find it has been tremendously positive with them. And you know, and our credibility goes up, you know, quite frankly. We've partnered, we've done the right thing, and it's all for the sake of creating an intermediate space where you can test things before you're basically compelled to implement them in production sources. So that's kind of my parting shot. Lastly, you know, please, the invitation again, please get creative. You know, we're kind of in the early stages of figuring out how this DITA stuff really plays out across many organizations and market segments when it comes to branding. Believe me, I have no lock on it for sure. So my invitation is get creative on your own. You know, as Frank, one of my heroes, says, open up your mind. Find out what works for you and share that with the community. First of all, your team. Second of all, the DITA community around you. And third, anything by way of that we can do to share your work and to help you on Oasis. Please do so. And lastly, I put my contact information there again. Please get in touch, especially if I've said something that pissed you off, as they say. Get in touch. I'd very much like to hear from you. And especially if this is an area of interest for you, or it's an area where you've been burned in dramatic ways. I like those stories too. Please get in touch and have some fun with it. The good news is branding's not going away, and the good news is DITA is there to help out, and it's actually quite adept at helping you. I think that's it, Bill, on my end.
All right, thanks, Stan. We'll get to questions. Let me just flip back here. Okay, got some questions here. One is jumping all the way back to the beginning. Do you have any tips on even making the inroads to get to a collaboration point with marketing groups?
Yeah, I found testing is the only way I was able to do it. If I were working, let's just take two other groups. If I were working with marketing and user experience groups, UXD, right? They each have different senses of what it means to do branding, right? For the UXD people, branding is very much a visual. At least I'm not demeaning, I'm just saying they're primarily looking at a lot of visual, and they're looking at a lot of navigation, they're looking at a lot of experience kind of dimensions. On the marketing side, they're really looking at a product-oriented thing. How do I map the features of particular products into suites, and how do I map that into a sales profile? So we have the same goal, but we're coming at it from very, very different points of view. I can't go to UXD and say, I want you to change your perspective. You know, they're doing their jobs just like I'm doing mine. But what I have found as the way to create inroads and frankly increase our cred is I'll take whatever their ideas are, I'll instantiate them in some test builds, and I'll go back to them and say, hey, again, is this what you wanted, right? This is what your idea looks like when we map it into DITA and we fire it off through some transforms for PDF or some transforms for web help or whatever. And so that's why I found that A, they look at us and say, hey, these people are taking us seriously. B, they're a lot more technical than they seem, which is good. And C, we're now iterating on how to improve the whole thing, see? And if you can do that once a quarter even, right? It's kind of a different world after a year or two. In other words, they kind of come down eventually, and instead of handing you an email and saying, hey, this is the new way we're doing things, they say, hey, I'm going to throw you a couple preliminary things. Any chance you could just test it out for us, just informally? And see, that's real goodness. So that's what I found is being there as a test partner to show them, you know, hey, this is what it looks like. What do you think? That was the inroad I found.
Sounds good. And actually going along with that, I guess from someone who's just getting started with trying to wrap their arms around brand management within DITA, where do you suggest they start to kind of get their feet wet before they jump in head first with, you know, keys, subject schemes, DITA vals, all that fun stuff. I mean, where do you suggest they start to kind of get some kind of bang for the buck back?
Yeah, great question. Before you have to jump into keys, which are at a level of complexity, I believe the complexity pays off, but not in the first week or two, okay? The first week or two is just frightening, okay? What I recommend is to take a regular old DITA topic file, right, and put in it a long list of just regular keywords. You know, here are the 10 things that marketing wants us to use by way of product names. Here are the 5 things that sales wants us to use by way of the formal names of sales support packages, right? And just start off with a nice simple DITA topic, put them all on a nice little list, make them phrases or keywords or even text elements, give them an ID, and without going anywhere near keys, you can use the DITA conref reuse mechanism to reference them. See, so you can gain a lot of experience just with a couple of those libraries and a few topics just to test out how it works, because you actually have to learn a lot about how to handle plurals and how to handle things like indefinite articles and running text in and around these. So that's a pretty low impact, easy to get into way to, you know, get into it a bit. And after you've been in that for a bit, you know, using conrefs and kind of these flat files, then the key stuff actually starts to look a little less scary. So that's what I recommend.
That's a good suggestion. Here's another good one. Do you find that stakeholders want to see the rebranded changes in real output? So after having gone through, you know, a complete transform with actual content, or is the test artifact always sufficient for demonstrating a successful rebranding?
Yeah, I should have probably qualified what was in that test repo. Not only do I have like little gallery files, which are mostly useful for us, right, writer types, right? What people in our stakeholders departments want to see is they want to see these new standards applied to actually some real content, right? So I'll bring over a couple of what I call them domains, a couple of folders of source files, right? Something that has a little bit more of a reference feel, like the API stuff. We'll bring a getting started over and then bring some user guide kind of content. So if I cover those 3 areas, you know, API reference, getting started, you know, very task intensive, and then kind of user guide-y stuff, I'll bring those 3 domains over and make copies of them in the test domain, so that when I run a test, what they're seeing is probably a couple, you know, like 75 to 100 pages of output. So the sense that they're seeing the real content, but they're not seeing it sourced from the production sources. They're seeing it sourced from the test repo. Does that help?
I think so. And I think we got time for one more question before I jump into that one. If anyone has any additional questions at all, you can certainly send them after this presentation to experts@learningdata.com, and we will have a roll-up of Q&A in the very last session on the very last day of Learning Data Live. So if you didn't get your question answered, feel free to shoot it over to experts@learningdata.com. All right, so final question here. What are some common problems that you find as a result of your testing efforts?
Yeah, the 2 biggies for me, one, if I don't do a lot of assiduous testing on it, meaning if I don't invest some time and my team invests some time, we don't see what are the subtle kind of contradictions in all the requests that we're getting, right? Not every upstream stakeholder group is talking to one another, right? So to some degree, we end up being a little bit of an implementation funnel or a bottleneck or an integration point where we discover things that ideally would have got discovered if other groups talked to one another. So that's number one, is don't assume that the upstream stakeholders are talking to one another. Sometimes they're actually saying very contradictory things. And it's not until you model them and show them, right, do you want me to do A, B, or C? I don't care which one, but choose one, right? It's not until you actually do that that you get a feel for what you're being asked. So that's number one, kind of, I would say, ambiguity resolution is in the requests. And the second is, boy, until you actually see how this plays out in real topics, you don't actually see how much rework and how much refactoring sometimes needs to get done by writers. Nothing makes, and I'm speaking as a writer, nothing like miffs me off more when somebody just says, go make this change, and they haven't even tested what the impact might be, right? Because that translates into evenings and weekends for me, and I don't want anything to do with that. So the challenge is making sure that in whatever you're doing with your testing, you're spending the time to try to calculate what the impact is actually going to be on the writers or translators or editors, right? Because that is part of an implementation cost, and we just need to make it visible. We need to measure it.
Well said.